Morning. It is Tuesday, the 14th of February, a significant day. I'll leave you to work out what it is. But we continue looking at the book of the prophet Isaiah. And today we read Isaiah chapter 63, verses 7 to 14. Now, what is interesting is that this is part of a slightly larger passage, which is from chapter 63, verse 7 to the end of chapter 64. It's verse 15, I think it is. And so these 1.5 chapters of Isaiah is a particular cry from Isaiah. It's a lament. And if we just pause and think about what we have been reading about in Isaiah, it is God speaking through the prophet and reminding the people who God is, and all that he has done for them. It is also God warning the people about what it is that they have done wrong, and warning them that there will be a consequence, a punishment, and aspects of that punishment are actually given prophetically. But also, in the long run, a prophetic message from God saying that there will be a remnant who will remain faithful to him, and God will send what is ultimately the Messiah to that remnant, and that remnant will grow in numbers as the rest of the world joins them. So very complex, but also incredibly orderly and powerful, albeit quite long, book of prophecy. And yet here, this little passage that we looked at today, and which itself is part of that slightly bigger passage from chapter 63, verse 7 to the end of chapter 64, is a lament by Isaiah. And you might think, well, is that God speaking? And I want to suggest that it really sounds as if this is Isaiah. It's as if he's in his spirit, overwhelmed by the message God is giving him. And then suddenly, as he comes to this realization of all that God is talking about, the personal character of Isaiah comes through, and he pens this little intrusion almost into the message of God, this lament. But it's more than just a lament of Isaiah personally. It's actually representing the whole nation of Israel. So a national lament. And I want to just very quickly talk about the role of a prophet. God does not come upon someone and almost make them a kind of automation, a robot, and they simply unknowingly, blindly, unthinkingly speak the very words of God. No, a prophet very often is just overwhelmed by the presence and the realization of what God is saying, and he or she puts into words what they believe God is saying. And there is this interesting interaction between the prophet reflecting the actual words and thoughts of God, and sometimes they could be and are, in fact, the very words of God, but that would not be true of the entire prophetic discourse. There is a sense, and I think this is how God wants it to be done, the vocabulary, the linguistic structure of that prophet comes through. And so you can read Isaiah and Jeremiah and Hosea, etc., and you will recognize their voice at work. If it was only God speaking and the prophet became a kind of a robot, then all the prophetic words would be exactly the same, and the little analogies used. But they're not. So you recognize the voice of a prophet coming through. And this is the way God works with us. He almost overwhelms us or speaks to us quite strongly, and we are left with this deep-rooted conviction of what God is thinking or feeling, and then we express that in our own words. And then the true prophet, in expressing that, actually begins to tap into some actual words or sentences or little phrase that God would give to him or her. And so those become the actual words of God. So there's a little bit of theology, very simply put, about how the prophet is at work. and why it is that Isaiah at this point suddenly is overwhelmed, not with God's conviction of what he wants Isaiah to share, but Isaiah's own personal conviction of where his nation have gone wrong. And he cries out to God and gives honor and praise to God, and then reflects on all that his people have done wrong and calls on God to forgive them and to lead and guide them, following that pattern of a lament. So, folks, something to think about, but a theology to reflect on for the day. God bless. We'll chat again tomorrow.